Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
Not only does this movie go hard, this theme song goes so fucking hard. Oh my God. And I've got 10 of them, or 9 more of them, just like it.
I'm going to be bored. See, I'm already bored.
I haven't started talking yet.
Oh, well, I'm already bored. Welcome to episode 197 of Nerdery and Murdering.
Big 197. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, the up, the down, the good and the bad, and the nerd and the murd. So before we start off, the first thing I need to say, because I promised him I was going to do this, my friend Chuck that listens to our show to go to sleep. Chuck, wake up. Going to be
Wake up, Chuck. Wake up, Chuck.
So I promised him I would give him a shout out on the show. There is a new Gabby Petito documentary on Netflix, which is really good.
Uh-huh.
I haven't gotten to the end of it yet, so I don't know if they have some updated information on it or whatnot. But I mean, gosh, good Lord, we covered Gabby Petito
2 years ago?
long time ago.
3 years ago.
Did that one really as the events were unfolding in that case.
Mm-hmm.
That was so current. We had to do a quick episode on that, and that was wild. But the documentary is really well done. It's very good. Did want to let everybody know that I've enabled a new feature on the show. I don't know when it'll start showing. I checked this morning and it's not there yet, but there's going to be in the description for our show a link to be able to text us.
Oh, nice.
And so if you want to give instant feedback while you're listening to a show, it'll text us to our stream page that we can get information there. So be looking for that. It'll say text the show, and you can click on it and send us messages right there. Um, we're we're currently watching The Night Agent on Netflix. It's a suspense thriller about an FBI agent who's investigating a crime. But it was so funny. I think we're on the last episode of season 1 right now, and I turned to my wife as we were watching it. I said, "My God, this show is one giant dick me fuck me."
Did you have to explain what "dick me fuck me" meant?
No, she figured it out very quickly. I mean, it's just the
Dick me,
FBI
fuck me,
the
screw me.
the FBI agent on there just gets screwed every time he turns around. It is just a giant dick me fuck me show, but it's really good. I've enjoyed it. It started off a little slow for me, like the first episode. I was like, okay, come on, let's move this along. But then it really picks up and goes. I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix, at least 2 seasons, or maybe 3. I can't
Okay.
remember. But really good, really good. I'm kind of interested to see where the second season is going to go once we get into that.
You need to check that bad boy
So,
out. Sounds pretty good. Who's in it?
The only, I mean, you'll recognize some of the people in there.
Mhm.
The biggest name in there that you'll know is Robert Patrick.
Oh, okay.
He's in there.
I love Robert Patrick.
The actor who played Amenadiel in Lucifer is in it.
Okay.
Can't remember his name. He's really good. A lot of the rest of them, I've seen them bit parts in different
Oh,
things.
it's that guy from that thing.
Yeah. The main character I've never seen before. He kind of reminds me of the guy who played the main character in the first season of Altered Carbon.
Okay.
Was also the colonel in Suicide Squad. That
Yeah.
guy, the main FBI agent, kind of reminds me of that. But like I said, it's good. Check out Night Agent. I've really enjoyed that. So anyway, I'm just going to kick back. I know what you're doing for this show. This is going to be you. This is not me. So it's all you here. So I'll let you kick it off with the nerdy side of the house.
Excellent. Today we're going to talk about Blaxploitation cinema. I love this stuff.
See, and I'm just not a big fan of it. I tried. I tried.
Yeah, and like our playlist has some of the more hard to find stuff. I was able to actually put in our playlists. There's actually 2 episodes of this. We did 5 on one side, 5 on the other.
Well, it was funny. It was funny. One of the movies you have in the list is one I tried to see a long time ago, and I didn't know it was part of this genre, and that now explains why I never really liked that movie.
Which one?
I'll let you know when you get to it.
Okay. All right. So today we're going to talk about 5 Blaxploitation films, and in the next episode we'll do another 5. But I wanted to do a deep dive in this because, again, I love this genre. It's gritty. It's 1970s for the most part. It did go into the 1980s a little bit. The underbelly of places like Chicago or New York or Atlanta, and it's fun. An exploitation film is a film that tries to succeed financially by exploiting current trends, niche genres, or lurid content. Exploitation films are generally low-quality B-movies, though some set trends attract critical attention, become historically important, and even gain a cult following. So, exploitation films aren't really a thing anymore. Well, okay, all movies are exploitation movies now. Exploitation movies were movies that weren't run under the Hays Code. Like, you couldn't show, they wouldn't pick them up in regular theaters. They'd show them at grindhouses, or they'd show them at in the case of the South, they show them in drive-ins. They're drive-in movies, and they'd usually be, again, lurid or seedy or something. They saw them as not being highbrow. Well, these types of cinema, eventually, once we get the rating code basically took over the movie industry. So there isn't really such a thing as exploitation cinema, but it used to be huge. Um, Blaxploitation is a subgenre of action movie derived from the exploitation film. And it started in the late 60s and the early 70s. Consequent to the combined cultural momentum of the Black Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, and the Black Panther Party. Political and sociological circumstances that facilitated Black artists reclaiming their power as representations of Black ethnic identity in the arts. The term Blaxploitation is a portmanteau of the words Black and exploitation. Coined by Junius Griffith, president of the Beverly Hills Hollywood branch of the NAACP in 1972. In criticizing the Hollywood portrayal of multiracial society of the U.S., Griffin said that the Blaxploitation genre was proliferating offenses to and against the Black community by perpetuating racist stereotypes and inherent criminality. I can see that a little bit, but they also, in a lot of cases, they also characterize the Black hero, which they didn't. That wasn't done up until that point. If a Black person was a hero, they were a side character. About as close as we got was Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek. But in these cases, they were portrayed as the hero, the cowboy, the pirate, that sort of character, where it's an anti-hero but also a hero at the same time. After the cultural misrepresentation of Black people in the race films of the 1940s, the 1950s, and the 1960s, the Blaxploitation movie genre presented Black characters and Black communities as the protagonists and the places of the story, rather than as background or secondary characters in the story, such as the magical Negro character or as the victims of criminals. To counter the racist misrepresentation of Blackness in the American movie business, the UCLA financially assisted Black students to attend film school. The cultural emergence of the Blaxploitation subgenre was facilitated by the Hollywood movie studios adopting a permissive system of film rating in 1968. As I said, exploitation films played at grindhouses and drive-ins, but they didn't play at major cinemas. So these films were kind of relegated to that because it took a while to go from Hays Code to the rating system. By the time you and I came along, it wasn't a thing anymore. We still had drive-ins, but like most of the grindhouses had converted to porn theaters at that point. We had a few in Fort Worth, but by the time you and I were big enough to go see them, they were already porn theaters. One of them got bulldozed to widen I-30. It was on Merrick and 30. At the Merrick exit, it doesn't even exist anymore. They hated that thing so much they got rid of the exit that went to it. Human stories extended in the Black characters and the human stories extended to the mainstream cinema of corporate Hollywood, recognizing the profitability and financial inexpensive Blaxploitation films. The corporate movie studios then produced Blaxploitation movies specifically for cultural sensibilities of mainstream viewers. The movie business magazine Variety reported that the films Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song and Shaft are the mainstream Blaxploitation films that followed the assimilation of Blaxploitation into mainstream cinema. By way of the films, Cotton Comes to Harlem. Blaxploitation films were the first to feature soundtracks of funk and soul music. Blaxploitation films set in the Northeast or West Coast mainly take place in poor urban neighborhoods. Pejorative terms of white characters such as cracker and honky are commonly used, which sound funny today. Blaxploitation films set in the South often deal with slavery and miscegenation. The genre's films are often bold in their statements and use violence, sex, drug trafficking, and other shocking qualities. They provoke the audiences. The film usually portrays Black protagonists overcoming the man or emblems of the white majority that oppresses the Black community. There are several subgenres, including Foxy Brown, which is crime, action and martial arts, Three the Hard Way, westerns, horror, which is Abby and Blackula, prison, which is penitentiary, comedy, Uptown Saturday Night, nostalgia, Five on the Black Hand Side, coming of age, Cooley High, Cornbread Earl and Me, and the musical Sparkle. But the first one we're going to talk about is Sweetback's badass song. It's a 1971 American independent blaxploitation action thriller film written, co-produced, scored, edited, and directed by and starring Melvin Van Peebles. His son Mario Van Peebles also appeared in a small role playing the title character as a young boy. The film tells the picturesque story of a poor black man fleeing from the white police authorities. Van Peebles began to develop the film after being offered a 3-picture deal contract from Columbia Pictures. No studio would finance the film, so Van Peebles funded it himself, shooting it independently over 19 days, performing all of his own stunts and appearing in several sex scenes, some reportedly unsimulated. He received a $50,000 loan from Bill Cosby to complete the project. Ooh. Yeah, in 1971. So the film fast-paced montages and jump cuts were unique features in American cinema at the time. The picture was censored in some markets and received mixed reviews. However, it has left a lasting impression on American cinema. He also got some money from Gilbert O'Sullivan, the English songwriter, and Earth, Wind, and Fire kind of scored the picture. So they basically released a soundtrack album.
Sorry, that just makes me think of the TV show Chuck, the manager of the Buy More. You've heard of Earth, Wind, and Fire? Well, I was rain.
I was rain.
It was Earth, Wind, Fire, and Rain.
And rain. Earth, Wind, Fire, and Rain. I was rain.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But yeah, the soundtrack for Sweetback's badass song was more orchestral because, it's Earth, Wind, and Fire. They can do that shit. And Mario Van Peebles kind of sang over it. You won't get me. The thing about Sweetback is it was, I don't know if it's 100% true. But Huey P. Newton celebrated and welcomed the film's revolutionary implications. And it became required viewings of the members of the Black Panther Party. The reason is because Sweetback gets away in the end. Sweetback gets basically shunted into, I don't want to say a life of crime, but he's just basically in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he gets screwed at every turn. But in the end, he gets away. So that's why it was celebrated. And they say that was the first time that ever happened in cinema. I'm not 100% sure that's correct, but it is definitely the first time that mainstream audiences ever saw that. In 2020, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry and Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Plus, the soundtrack by Earth, Wind, and Fire is incredible. That was another thing. One of the major selling points of a lot of these films is they had great soundtracks. The music in the films, it kind of went hand in hand. Have you ever seen Sweetback?
No.
Yeah. You could tell he shot it basically with his own money. Because it's 1971. It doesn't have an epic quality. It does have an independent quality. I'm not saying it's cheaply made because it's not. It's actually really, really well done. But, there's not buildings exploding and stuff like that. But it does kind of go hard. Mario Van Peebles is great in it too, because you feel for Sweetback. It's like, dude, this dude ain't done nothing. This dude ain't done nothing, and everybody's going after him. Just leave that poor dude alone. And he does. He gets away. There's a burning police car, and he's running away. I love Sweetback. I love the soundtrack, not as much as the next film that I want to talk about. The soundtrack for the next film is probably my favorite blaxploitation track. And that would be Across 110th Street. Also, wait, before we skip on to that, in our playlist, Sweetback is in its entirety. Sweetback's badass song. we got the whole movie in there. So if you guys want to see it, because I don't think it's available for streaming right now, so you could see it maybe at a later date when you guys come to see this. It may not be there, which means it'll be streaming. That's generally how that works. But check it out. Check out our playlist. There's some great music and stuff in there as well. Um, so now we're going to move on to the next film, which is Across 110th Street. It's a 1972 American neo-noir action thriller, film directed by Barry Shear and starring Yaphet Kotto, Anthony Quinn, Anthony Franciosa, and Paul Benjamin. The film is set in Harlem, New York, and takes its name from the 110th Street, the traditional dividing line between Harlem and Central Park that functioned as an informal boundary of race and class in 1970s New York City. It focuses on a heist, murder, and subsequent investigation. Across 110th Street takes inspiration from both the Blaxploitation films of the 1970s as well as the film noir genre. Across 110th Street is remembered in part for its soundtrack, which features the classic song of the same name by Bobby Womack. Honestly, the scenes where Bobby Womack singing over the action across 110th Street, like it opens with the dudes driving, and you get the full song. That is in our playlist as well. Anthony Quinn served as executive producer, originally wanted John Wayne and then Kirk Douglas for the lead role as Captain Matelli, but both of them passed. So did Burt Lancaster, which forced Quinn to have to take the part. Additionally, he hoped to get Sidney Poitier to play Lieutenant Pope. Upon hearing the news, Harlem residents disagreed with the choice, claiming Poitier was too Hollywood and not urban enough for the role. Quinn relented, and Yaphet Kotto was chosen to play Pope. When planning the film, director Barry Shear was adamant that he only be filming in real locations. Could he bring a suitably raw and genuine feel to the themes of gangs, warfare, and bloody street violence? Hollywood colleagues warned him that New York was the worst city in which to film due to labor costs and permit nightmares, and Harlem the worst part of New York. Due to its status at the time as the most lawless ghetto in the U.S., undeterred, Shear took on Fouad Said, an unrivaled expert in location shooting, as co-producer. Said he cut his teeth as a cameraman on the TV series I Spy, which broke new ground for American televisions by mixing studio work with location footage shot all over the world. A feat made possible by abandoning the ubiquitous but unwieldy Mitchell cameras of the day in favor of the lightweight Arriflex 35 2C. Arriflex 35 2C cameras and Arriflex 35 BL cameras are the reason that we were able to have independent cinema in the first place. They allowed that. Yes, by today's standards, they were exceedingly unwieldy and exceedingly expensive, but you didn't buy them, you rented them. But it did kind of revolutionize the way that those films were shot. And you can tell this film is at street level, Harlem, 1970s New York, when New York City was dying. So we've discussed that before, that hip hop and punk were born out of the fact that New York City didn't have any money and no one picked up the trash for a year. You get a documentation of that in this film because they're running down the street, not only in cars, on foot, buildings that are being condemned or torn down or in the process of being torn down. Beautiful. It looks like it's always raining, even though it's broad daylight. Just this and like the French Connection and stuff like this. This is where that gritty crime drama kind of cut its teeth. A combination of Fouad Said's radical location skills and ARRI's groundbreaking technology allowed Shear's dream of a realistic backdrop for a story to be accomplished. A staggering 95% of the movie was shot at a total of 60 different interior and exterior locations in Harlem. They did have to do a little bit of post-dubbing for the dialogue. And of course they had to overlay the sound on top of it. But oh my God, it's epic. Have you ever seen Across 110th Street?
No. You're going to find that's going to be my common answer to these.
Man, Across 110th, but again, it's my favorite. It is violent, 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 violent. I love the character of Nibbles, who's one of the bad guys in the film. He's freaking great. I think Bill Cosby's actually in it too, for like a second. Um, but the bad guy in the film, the heist he did, he was robbing a bunch of mob guys who were making deals with the police. So the ultimate bad guys got killed the first 5 minutes of the film because ultimately those were the bad guys. He was just trying to make a way for his family, and he ends up getting burnt for it. But that is basically the secondary story. The primary story is Mattelli and Pope trying to figure out what the hell's going on because they come across a murder scene where these guys had just basically killed a high level in the city of New York and a bunch of mobsters in a room with an automatic machine gun. And there's money on the floor. Not a lot because they took most of it. But yeah, it's dark. And of course, you got Bobby Womack singing across 110th Street, which is amazing. Just a beautiful piece of cinema. I can't recommend it enough. Again, it's not in our playlist, but it is easy to stream because I was able to stream it in a couple of different places. The next film on our list is Superfly. It's a 1972 American blaxploitation crime drama film directed by Gordon Parks Jr. and starring Ron O'Neal as a young blood priest, an African-American cocaine dealer who's trying to quit the underworld drug business. The film is well known for its soundtrack written and produced by soul musician Curtis Mayfield. It was released on August 4th, 1972. O'Neal reprised his role as young blood priest in the 1973 film Superfly TNT, which he also directed. Producer Sig Shore directed a second sequel, The Return of Superfly, released in 1990, with Nathan Purdie as priest. A remake was released in 2018. In 2022, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Filming took place from mid-April 1972 in New York City. The film was financed by two directors, Gordon Parks, who had directed the 1971 film Shaft, and Sig Shore, who produced Superfly and played Deputy Commissioner Riordan, or the Man, in the film. Large companies produced many of the blaxploitation films, and Superfly is no exception. The film was acquired and distributed by Warner Brothers and had a white producer, Sid Shore. African Americans were a part of the process as well, with Gordon Parks Jr. as director and Philip Fitney as screenwriter. Nate Adams coordinated the fashion and wardrobe for the films. He had done several fashion shows prior to Superfly. He still owns many of the suits, shoes, and fedora hats. Charles McGregor, who played Fat Freddy, was released from prison before the film's production. The film was shot by director of photography James Signorelli, who later became the film segment director for Saturday Night Live. Carl Lee, who played Eddie, enjoyed television fame until he abused drugs, in particular heroin. He died in 1986 of an overdose. The film's soundtrack by Curtis Mayfield was well enough received that he was sought for other soundtracks. The song "Freddy's Dead" and the title song both shot up the pop top 10 charts in late 1972, with each single selling over 1 million copies. As cool as Superfly and Freddy's Dead are, the best song on there is Pusher Man. There's a groove behind it that's just amazing. And despite the controversial surrounding Superfly's drug use, the production of the film made significant advances for African Americans. The Harlem community backed Superfly financially, and a number of black businesses helped with the production costs. Another quality that distinguishes Superfly from other blaxploitation films was the technical crew, the majority of which were, people from the community. Not just black people, but Harlem at large, because not only black people live in Harlem. I mean, there's all kinds of people live up there. It was a predominantly black neighborhood, especially in the 70s. Not so much now. But, other people live there as well. But yeah, that's Superfly. Have you ever seen Superfly?
I've seen bits and pieces of it. Again, this is kind of one of those that I tried to watch because I heard about it, but it's just like
Mhm.
it's just not for me. Um, and as we talk through this, it hits me that I think Luke Cage was done a little bit in this type of genre.
Oh
The
yeah.
way that you're describing this, it kind of makes
Oh
me
yeah.
think.
If you yeah, Luke Cage is definitely um that series pulls heavily from blaxploitation cinema.
And again, Luke Cage was not one of my favorites of those, so makes sense.
Um yeah, I love super again. Most of the stuff I got introduced to from the soundtracks.
Hmm.
Because when I was a little kid, my dad was really into my dad and my uncle and well, my uncle slash brother as well were really into early 1970s soul. So it was always listening to it. That's kind of how I was introduced. And they're like, "Oh, hey, you should see this movie." And I was way too young to be watching this stuff. And they take me to the drive-ins and go, "Oh, hey, you should go see Superfly with us." And I'd just be just jamming out, this little kid, and watching people getting shot, which may explain why I have the love for film that I do. Um, and can kind of view it as I view it as a fan of the film, not so much the characters and the actors, the way they do it. And I think
Hmm.
that's where all that came from, but I could be wrong. I mean, we went to the movies a lot when I was a little kid, and we saw some of these movies. The next one is an independent film. It is Foxy Brown. It's a 1974 American blaxploitation action film written and directed by Jack Hill, who we've talked about. It stars Pam Grier as the title character who takes on a gang of drug dealers who killed her boyfriend. The film was released by American International Pictures, or AIP, as a double feature with Truck Turner. The film uses Afrocentric references in clothing and hair. Grier starred in 6 blaxploitation films for American International Pictures. While not prosecuted for obscenity, this film was seized and confiscated in the United Kingdom under Section 3 of the Obscene Publications Act of 1959 during the video nasty panic. Um, Foxy Brown seeks revenge when her government agent boyfriend is shot down at her doorstep by members of a drug syndicate. She links her boyfriend's murders to the modeling agency run by Stevie Elias and Catherine Wall that services local judges, congressmen, and police in the area. Foxy decides to pose as a prostitute to infiltrate the company and help save a fellow black woman from a life of drugs and sexual exploitation, and reunites her with her husband and child. According to director Jack Hill, due to tensions between AIP and him, he was not invited to direct to the sequel for Coffee until the last minute. Tensions arose at a screening of a different film in which AIP had been working, which they were eager to show to Hill. Hill worked out unimpressed, and AIP made a vow to never hire him again. AIP founder Samuel Z. Arkoff reconciled with Hill, however, after the success of Coffee. So instead of making a sequel to Coffee, Foxy Brown, they made Foxy Brown instead, which also Coffee also starred Pam Grier. They originally used the working title Burn Coffee Burn. However, AIP decided at the last minute it did not want to do a sequel. Therefore, it is never said exactly what kind of job Foxy Brown has. Coffee was a nurse, and since this was no longer to be a sequel, they could not give Foxy Brown that job and did not have time to rewrite the script to establish just what kind of job she had. On the audio commentary of the film's DVD release, Hill mentions that he was initially against the outfits that the wardrobe department chose for Foxy Brown since Pam Grier had become a star in Coffee. An impetus existed to present the actress as even more stylish than she had appeared in the previous film. The 14 costumes were designed by a California couturier named Ruthie West, who had also the style for Jackson 5, Thelma Houston, Bobby Gentry, the Curtis Brothers, and Sisters Love, among others. Hill, by his own account, initially felt that the outfits were too trendy and specific to the time period, and within a few years would cause the film to look dated and obsolete. In the years since the film's release, however, Hill has reversed his opinion on Foxy's clothing, particularly in the wake of not only Foxy Brown's ascent into pop culture icons, but also the 1970s nostalgia movement that started in the mid 1990s. He'll also mention that the character Foxy Brown became something of a female empowerment symbol that seemed to transcend the time period of the film. I would agree. Of the Pam Grier Blaxploitation films, Coffee, the women in prison films that she did, Foxy Brown is the one that basically uh, shows her as basically the toughest. Even though in another one of the films, she's actually a, a federal agent, or no, she works for Interpol. She's just tough and hardcore in this film. She wears wigs, because she's trying to pretend to be someone she's not, and she has like razor blades in them in her fro, and she'll take them out and just cut the shit out of somebody. It is badass, shooting people, beating the hell out of them. It's just awesome. She you talk about taking their power back. That's what they did, which is really weird because yes, Pam Grier is a very strong, independent woman on her own. But I mean, I don't think she would actually hurt anyone. When you hear her talk, it's like, oh, she's really the sweetest, kindest person I've ever heard. But Foxy Brown, no. Foxy Brown break your nose before she talk to you. I just love how they wrote her. She's hardcore. I've got a lot of scenes from Foxy Brown. I didn't get the full movie in our playlist. But there are some really great scenes, mostly centering on Pam Grier because, the camera loves her. And she goes hard in this film. I'm assuming you've never seen Foxy Brown.
This one, yeah, I've seen this one. This is kind of the one where I was like, I guess I didn't realize that this was an exploitation film, but it makes sense why I didn't really like it.
This is a Blaxploitation film.
Yeah.
Okay, this is fun. The next film is Petey Wheatstraw, The Devil's Son-in-Law. This movie is supposed to be blaxploitation and comedy, and it is in full measure. If you know anything about Rudy Ray Moore, he was a comedian who made these party records, is what they called them back in the day, where he was Dolomite. And yeah, they sold really, really well. He ended up self-financing a movie in this old abandoned rundown hotel that he used as his movie studio. He lived there. And they also shot everything there. Well, Dolomite was a hit. So the next thing he wanted to do was another movie. He is not great in Dolomite. You could tell it's the first time he'd really ever been in front of a camera. He was a great performer, live performer. He was great on the records or on radio, but he never really done. And they were figuring out how to make movies at the time because the guy they got as the director was brand new. The same with the producer. They were basically all young, but doing it on the fly. It was very, very learn as we go. To me, Dolomite has that appearance. Like when they do the fight cut scenes, they're a little rough. When they get to Petey Wheatstraw, because the next movie they did was Petey Wheatstraw, they figured all that shit out. So Petey Wheatstraw, to me, is what they were trying to do in Dolomite with a supernatural tinge to it. Petey Wheatstraw, also known as Petey Wheatstraw, The Devil's Son-in-Law, is a 1977 American blaxploitation comedy film written and directed by Cliff Rockmore and starring comedian Rudy Ray Moore alongside Jimmy Lynch, Leroy Daniels, Ernst Mayhand, Ebony Wright, and Wildman Steve Gallen. It's typical of Moore's other films from the same era, such as Dolomite and The Human Tornado. In the film, a successful nightclub comedian is murdered by jealous rivals. He is resurrected along with his killed friends through a literal deal with the devil. Having agreed to marry the devil's daughter, he gains magic powers through a magic cane granted to him and uses them to seek revenge. Wishing to renege on the deal, the comedian eventually attacks and kills the devil, but he is shocked when confronted by the resurrected devil in his car. Petey Wheatstraw is born during a Great Miami hurricane and after a difficult labor by his mother emerges as a talking, diaper-wearing 6-year-old boy who promptly attacks the door and then his father for disturbing me in my sleep every night. His mother stops him, puts him in his place, and names him Petey Wheatstraw. While a young teenager, after being beaten up by a gang, Petey meets a mentor named Bantu who teaches him the philosophy of kung fu and self-respect. Taking a vow not to bow before any man, living or dead, Petey grows up to become a successful nightclub comedian who books a series of shows at a club in Los Angeles. It is basically there where the story picks up. But you get this, all of this in the beginning. When Petey refuses to do something for some local hoodlums, Leroy and Skillet, they send henchmen down on Petey, Petey's business partner, Ted's little brother, Larry, and then attempt to wipe out Petey at the boy's funeral by machine gunning the entire party. Mortally wounded, Petey is visited by Lou Cypher, the devil. This is the first time I ever heard Lou Cypher. I think they used it again in a Mickey Rourke film, Angel Heart, in the late 80s and the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of chaos. Rudy Ray Moore's films are just pure chaos, but they're also pure fun. Because there's Foxy Brown's a serious film. Across 110th Street is a serious film. This is not. This is just fun. It is in our playlist, the entire movie. It is not a great copy, but it's pretty good. Petey Wheatstraw's kind of hard to find sometimes. I think you can go out and get it on Tubi, one of the sites, for a slightly better copy, but the sound is better on our in our YouTube playlist. Again, as long as it sits. There's also basically these film critics basically take apart right after that film, take apart Petey Wheatstraw and basically talk about it. Again, like me, fans of blaxploitation cinema. But yeah, Rudy Ray Moore basically did this all on his own. Have you ever seen Petey Wheatstraw?
I'd never even heard of this one.
Yeah, honestly, as far as blaxploitation films go, this is like one of my favorite. It's like across 110th Street, Petey Wheatstraw. Because I just love it. It's campy. It's funny. It is non-commercial, which I love. It's basically just him and his friends making a movie, and they do the same thing for Dolomite, which you get a little bit of in Petey Wheatstraw. You get a little bit of. He doesn't call himself Dolomite, but he does a Dolomite talk. But yeah, Petey Wheatstraw is incredible. It's lurid. There's a bunch of sex scenes because Rudy Ray Moore liked to do those because he thought they were funny. Because he does them in a humorous way. He gets down with like 6 demon women. So they're these beautiful women with these messed up faces. Because they have like demon masks on. And actually, for somebody with very little budget and very little experience, they look pretty good. Particularly figuring out that they did this in like 1972. But yeah, Petey Wheatstraw is on here in its entirety, so check it out, kids. I would recommend any of these movies, but if you're looking to just have a good time, sit down and watch Petey Wheatstraw. Well, that's about it for this episode. I'm going to do 5 more blaxploitation films in the next episode. And I think the episode after that, we're going to talk about music from blaxploitation films because they're really an important part. So,
One that I thought, and maybe it's not an exploitation film, but I always thought it was, and again, I'm not a fan of this movie, and I kind of thought it was in here. Was Jackie Brown?
Oh yeah,
this genre?
Jackie Brown is an homage to blaxploitation cinema.
Okay, that's what I thought. Which explains why that's a Tarantino film I just don't like.
It's a blaxploitation film.
These films just strike a chord with me, and I have a hard time enjoying them. And like I said, I tried to watch some of these. I'm just like, no, I just can't. I can't.
They are dark.
Not my thing. Yeah,
What Petey Wheatstraw isn't.
and
You ever the Sidney Poitier, Bill Cosby films of the '70s? Let's Do It Again. Did you like those as a kid?
no, not really.
Okay, then you may not like Petey Wheatstraw. See, I love those. I think that may have been my gateway into this genre too. Not just seeing the
Gotcha,
movies and the thing, but like they would be on in the late night movie I'd watch with my grandfather. We just laugh.
gotcha. Okay. Well, no, I appreciate you going through that. Others can take a listen and decide for themselves. It's not my genre, but appreciate the info.
Thank you.
All right, cool. With that, I guess we will step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
Okay, for today, I got my information off Medium, SK Pop, Nonstop Local Billings News, Entertainment Now, and Desiree News in Medium, if I didn't say Medium. And this is the murder of Susan Casey.
Susan Casey.
Kind of a long one. So buckle up. So Susan Marie Limesand, later Casey, was known to loved ones as Susie, and she was born in a close-knit, devout Catholic family in the town of Circle, Montana. She was the fifth of six children born to Marlene Limesand and her husband Jack, who served as the county undersheriff at the time. Susie had a passion for horses and loved to go riding, especially with her sister Carlene. She was involved in basketball band and the 4-H club, and she was said to be a very hard worker, not afraid to be out there shoveling manure or fixing a fence. Her family described her as fun and most definitely feisty. And after graduating high school, Susie moved to 3 hours away to Billings, Montana, to attend a technical school. And after college, she dedicated herself to her career working at the Macomb County Nursing Home and Glendive Medical Center. It was in Billings where she met Walter Marty Larson, and before long, as their relationship quickly progressed, Susan was discovered she was pregnant. In 1993, Susan and Marty moved back to her hometown of Circle, Montana, and had a beautiful church wedding surrounded by her family. She was very young, but her family was just happy that she was happy. And the newlyweds welcomed their daughter, Mara, Marya. How would you pronounce that? Marya?
Maria.
Mayra?
Marya.
Yeah,
Maria.
I've never seen that. Marya.
Maria.
Um,
Pretty name.
it is. But they welcomed their daughter, and a few years later, a son named Shay. Um, However, though, their whirlwind romance wasn't going to last. After 5 years, the couple divorced in 1998, with Susan gaining custody of both children, and then Marty left without a second look back. Her kids were her life, though, and so she made the very best of this new situation. But Susan wasn't one to sit still for long. While working as a medical transcriptionist, she met Ted Casey, who was a rugged, quote, man's man with good looks who loved horses just like she did. And her friends and family thought he might be the one she would settle down with because he was 14 years her senior. And they believed he was not only a great match, but someone who could provide stability in her life.
Yeah.
For a while, he did. They married and they had two daughters together, Kiana and Charlie. But the stay-at-home domestic life was not life for Susan. Again, she was a very feisty person, and she loved to get out. She loved to socialize.
To do something.
Yeah. So it wasn't long before Ted and Susan started having issues in their marriage. They had very different personalities and expectations of each other. Susan would tell her sister-in-law Valerie that he wanted her home by the 10 p.m. news and was constantly trying to tame her. Then one night while they were out at a bar, things reached a boiling point. After a few drinks, they started arguing. Ted dumped a beer over Susan's head and found himself arrested, spending the night in jail after he slapped her across the face.
Oh.
And for Susan, that was that. Their marriage ended that night.
She's done.
Yep. So she moved out. She took all four kids and found her own apartment in Glendive. It didn't matter to her that Ted apologized and pleaded guilty to misdemeanor domestic assault. For her, the marriage was done. I'd said earlier this is a small town. Small town gossip gets around fast. People noticed how Susan was spending her newly single life, which more than a few people described as sowing wild oat as a sowing wild oats season.
Hmm.
She didn't care what anybody thought. She liked to have fun, but you always have to keep safety in mind. And when you're a mother, like it or not, your babies have to come first.
Yep.
Um, Half keeping that in mind, Susan left her eldest two children at her Ponderosa apartment to fend for themselves and took the girls to Ted's house for the night. Remember, the older two were her children with Marty, and the younger two were hers with Ted.
Hmm.
She
How
stopped
old
by
were the older children?
the older children, so Susan and Marty moved back in 93. You married Ted. She married Ted not too much longer after the divorce. They divorced in 98. So the kids would have been the oldest would have been 5 in 98. She was with Ted how many years? I can't. 14, 14.
She was 10, 14. So okay, so the
But
kids were like 17 and 18.
Mario was 14 at this
Oh,
point, and
Mario was 14.
she's the oldest, so she was
Okay.
14. Um,
Yeah,
sorry,
that kid.
I had to figure that one out.
No, no, sorry. It's just I was like, they're kind of young to be leaving them at home, but 14, 15 for a
14.
few hours. Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Susan did stop by to see her sister-in-law, who noticed that Susan was a little more dressed up than usual. She had a full face of makeup, and she assumed she had a date later. Susan then met up with friends for drinks, and around 11 o'clock that Friday night, she left the bar. Early the next day, Maria started to worry. They were used to the fact that Susan liked to go out and party and would often go out at night, but they were also used to her always coming home either later that evening or in the early hours.
Yeah,
Regardless, Susan would always be home by the time they woke up.
yeah.
Maria repeatedly tried calling her mom, but didn't get a response. She really thought something was wrong, so she called her grandparents,
Hmm.
and then people began to search for Susan. Carlene, Susie's sister, figured that the kids must have misunderstood, thinking they'd forgotten Susie had mentioned she'd be leaving early. But with each unanswered call, that notion was fading further and further. Valerie, who was married to Susan's brother Rusty, had already called Susan that morning before any alarm bells were raised to invite her shopping, but she hadn't heard back. She didn't think much of it, and she went on by herself. Then Rusty called her from work to say that no one could find Susan, and Valerie immediately called Susan again, leaving a voicemail, this time frantically begging her to check in as soon as possible.
Hmm.
She made countless calls trying to trace Susan's movements the previous night and finally found the friends Susan had been drinking with. They told her that Susan had indeed left the bar at 11 p.m., apparently for a date with a new boyfriend. This was news to
Hmm.
Valerie. So Valerie's mind was racing at this point, and it dawned on her maybe Susan had gone to Ted's to pick up the younger two, and they'd gotten into a heated argument, which could explain why she wasn't answering the phone.
Hmm.
Because remember, Ted pleaded guilty to assaulting Susie just a few months earlier, so it wasn't beyond the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
So Valerie jumped in her car to head over there. But when she pulled up to Ted's, the house was dark and there was no sign of Susie's car. She called Rusty and told him she was coming to pick him up so they could both go over to Susie's apartment. And the couple arrived there and tentatively made their way around the apartment, but found nothing to indicate that she had left abruptly. So, you know, I know a lot of people are thinking, so what that she's not answering her phone. A lot of people are bad at hearing their phone ring or replying to calls and texts, but not Susan. Everyone that knew her phone was her life.
Well, not only that, but this isn't today. This is like 2000 and just the kid was born in 93. This was not too long. This was a little while ago. People still answered their phones.
Right. Well, and it was a running joke in the family that her phone was practically attached to her and she always answered it. So this was a big
Yeah.
red flag for her family,
Yeah.
telling them something wasn't wrong. Um, Valerie, though, decided to play detective, and it didn't find out long to find out who Susie'd been a date with after leaving the bar, and his name was Brad Holzer. So she figured surely he'd know where she was.
Yep.
Brad actually lived less than 5 minutes from Susie's apartment, so Valerie drove over and knocked on the door. He answered, and she said, quote, "Susie's not home. We can't find her. She's not answering our calls, and we're all really worried." And then Brad replied, "What do you mean she's not home? I dropped her off at 5 a.m." So he's dropped her off at Susie's apartment at 5 a.m. So Valerie and Rusty decided at that point to go to the police. They knew something was very, very wrong.
Well, yeah, and okay, so she drove. Was her car at Holter's place? Brad Holter, is that right?
Her car was not there. Or at least they didn't see it.
Okay.
So,
All right.
Brad dropped her off there. So, there was nothing about the car so far.
Okay. So she went from the bar to Brad's place, I get, but we're assuming.
Assuming.
Yeah. How did she get there?
To Brad's?
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Sorry.
It comes up. It does come up.
I'm following the breadcrumbs. Sorry.
Yes. Oh yeah, and there's a lot of breadcrumbs to follow in this one. I promise that. So in a town that small, the police were already aware of Susie's history and the abuse she had suffered 6 months prior from Ted. But the officers did start their investigation. They went to Susan's apartment. Based on the oldest kid's accounts, who was Mara and Shay, their mom had never come back inside the apartment after leaving early Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the apartment, there was no signs of a struggle or any indication that a crime had been committed. However, outside, investigators did notice a couple of strange things. Susan's apartment was located off the street, and it was in the doorway next to the building that they found a footprint in the dust. What made it strange, though, was that the entrance was no longer in use, but the print looked recent and fresh. Walking around the building, they noticed a drag mark in the alleyway. There weren't any signs of blood, but the drag mark appeared as though something heavy had recently been pulled along the ground. But there's no blood, no signs of foul play, no body, so they couldn't jump to conclusions that Susan was
drag
dead.
mark. Somebody could be dragging out an old mattress to the dumpster.
Sure,
yeah.
But police knew in their gut that something was wrong. Susan hadn't just innocently gone missing in action.
No.
Family, friends, and the whole area agreed with this. The town was far too small for someone just to vanish into thin air. So, those of you who have listened long enough, you know that policing 101 is that the spouse is suspect numero uno.
Yep.
And technically, Susan still had a spouse because she was still married to Ted.
Mm-hmm.
They were separated, but legally they were still married. So they placed a call to Ted, and it just so turned out that he happened to be out of town. So coincidence, maybe. He told detectives he would be back the next day and would come by the station.
So he's got the two young kids with him?
Yes.
Okay.
So he had his daughter staying the night before, so the timing was kind of odd to detectives that he's now out of town.
Yeah.
Valerie and Rusty also made sure detectives knew about Susie's date with Brad, so they didn't let they didn't let any time waste for Ted's return to town. They tracked down Brad and asked him to come to the station. If you think the husband's always a suspect, then you're going to think that the married boyfriend will be too. Yeah,
oh no,
he was married. He and his wife were planning on separating, but they were still living together. So Susie obviously didn't go to his house.
Oh, that's why her car's not there.
Right.
Okay. I'm with you.
So, this was an unusual situation, but he was potentially the last person to see Susan that night.
Mm-hmm.
But he told investigators that he had dropped her off at her apartment around 5 a.m., but she never made it inside. Brad had actually re-entered Susan's life only 3 weeks before she disappeared on St. Patrick's Day of 2008. He'd been hanging around at the bar when he looked up to see Susan. And years before, as teenagers, they'd briefly dated, but then drifted apart. And just by pure chance, they found themselves at the same bar that night all those years later. They began catching up on old times, and as if those missing years never existed. And from that night on, they'd been pretty inseparable. Investigators told Brad to start from the beginning, so he did. He said he picked up Susan around 11 p.m. on Friday night. So there's your answer
At the
about the
bar.
car.
Okay.
And they drove out of town, parking near a place called Yellowstone. You don't have to be a genius to figure it out. They went parking.
Yeah.
After they finished what they were doing, he drove her back to Glendive. He pulled into a parking spot across the street from her apartment, but she didn't immediately get out. They began kissing. And before long, Susan hopped out of Brad's truck with her bra slung over her shoulder and made her walk of shame back home. He ended the interview by saying he'd seen her walking to the door of her building and in his rearview mirror as he backed out of the parking spot and headed towards his house a few miles away. Allegedly, he got home around 5:30 and went straight to bed. However, he remembered his wife arriving home at 6 a.m. from a date of her own.
Okay.
Okay, situation, but whatever.
Hey, it's probably more financial. Hey, look, we're going to split the sheets, but
It could be.
Yeah. Hey, it's cheaper for us to live here.
The police did corroborate this with her, and she confirmed that that when she got back, Brad was there and in bed. But just to be thorough, they interviewed Brad and his wife separately a few more times to see if anything tripped them up, but their stories never changed. And so detectives had very little to, they had to move on. They had no evidence just other than them had anything to do with the disappearance. Everything about Brad's story made sense except for one bizarre detail. Earlier in the day, before he met Susan at 11 p.m., he got a strange email. The sender's name was Denise Johnson, but he didn't know anyone by that name, and the email simply said, "How is your girlfriend, and how does your wife feel?"
Well, apparently his wife's fine with it.
Right. It's a weird, but it's a strange email to come out of the blue like that.
Cryptic.
However, by now, Ted had returned to Glendive, and he sat down with investigators. He explained on the morning Susan disappeared, he had gotten up around 5 a.m. And had taken his and Susan's two daughters back or to his brother's house. On the way back, he drove past Susan's apartment, not to look for her, but simply because he was on his route to the town hall where he was meeting someone for work. And after that meeting, he then drove out of town to a rodeo, all of which had been pre-planned well before Susan went missing. So, yeah, sure having trouble keeping up. We've got Susan's estranged husband, who was near her apartment around the last reported time she'd been seen, and Brad, the boyfriend, who was potentially the last person to actually see her. So, could her disappearance be linked to this little love triangle she seems to be a part in? Who knows? With that in mind, though, investigators did ask Ted about the last time he'd seen Susan, and he said it was when she dropped the girls off around 7 p.m. that Friday night. They felt he was hesitating, so they pressed him further, and he admitted he called her later that evening after he received a strange phone call. An unknown male voice called him around 9 p.m., asking what he thought about the fact that his wife was seeing Brad Holzer. Right.
And then Brad got the weird email.
Correct.
Is this corroboratable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it Brad's wife?
So, Ted was very upfront with investigators. He admitted he was upset to learn she was seeing someone, so he did call Susan to confront her. After all, they were still legally married, and her moving on so quickly was a massive blow to his ego, especially in a small town where everybody talks. Susan told him she wasn't cheating since they were separated, and the call ended with both of them mad. So police were a little stumped. They essentially had two possible suspects in a potential love triangle gone wrong, but they had no answers. Both men admitted to being near Susan's apartment building around the time she went missing, but there was literally no proof linking either to her disappearance.
Yeah.
We've got two suspects, both with means and opportunity, but absolutely nothing to go on. And not only that, there's the strange occurrences that both men reported, Brad with the email and Ted with the phone call.
Which were both corroborated.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, after speaking with Brad's wife and Ted's brother, it seemed like both men's alibis were solid. They each appeared to have been exactly where they claimed to be just after Susan was last seen. And when we got a break in the case. Another witness, excuse me, not not your conventional type of witness. Just down the street was an ATM with a working camera. So
Yes.
police wanted to see if it captured anything from early that Saturday morning. And the camera captured Susan getting out of Brad's truck. However, it did clear both Brad and Ted completely because the footage showed both men doing exactly what they had described doing in their statements. It captured Brad's truck pulling in, and a while later, Susan getting out. As she walked across the street, investigators could see Brad driving off. Then Ted's car
Backing
came
out,
into
leaving. Yeah.
view. Yep.
Yeah.
Then Ted's car came into view, drove right past without stopping in the direction of the town hall, just like he said.
Hmm.
So investigators were back at square one. Um, Deep down, officers felt that Susan wasn't alive. She wouldn't have left her kids and her family behind.
Yeah.
Um,
She's either
her family,
confined or dead.
right? Her family said that her children were her greatest love. So they were all just kind of living in limbo, waiting to hear the next piece of news. A month later, they would receive the bad news. Susan's body floated ashore in the Yellowstone River, 28 miles from her apartment door. The detectives working the case drove out to the river to confirm if it was Susan. And when they saw the body, they knew immediately. She was wearing the very shirt Brad had described in his interview with no bra and one missing shoe. And so their missing person case had now officially become a homicide. The autopsy showed no signs of water in her lungs, meaning she had already been dead before going in the water. And her hyoid bone was crushed, meaning the cause of death
Who's
was
strangled.
manual strangulation, which is a very up close and personal method to kill somebody. So this was
Yep.
something that was personal. There's nothing random about this. So now they had confirmation that it was Susan's body that had been found. Investigators pulled both Brad and Ted back in, but they were really clutching at straws at this point because the footage from the ATM had evidently cleared them, but you never know. Both men came back and both men gave the exact same story they'd been telling since Susan disappeared.
Hmm.
Her body offered no clues who could have done this, but detectives knew they were missing something important. Um,
Oh my God. The population of Circle, Montana in 2010 was 615 people.
yeah, it's a small town, man.
Wow. Sorry.
So detectives went back to the drawing board, and in May of 2008, Susan's family laid her to rest. Detectives went back to the beginning, poring over the statements they had taken, and realized there was a common thread in the case, which was Susan's phone. Almost everyone had mentioned knowing something was wrong because Susan lived on her phone. So
Hmm.
they realized they needed to take a closer look, and their investigation finally began to gain traction as Susan's phone was about to become a key piece of evidence in solving her murder. Pulling Susan's phone records, investigators saw that just as Ted had said, he called her and briefly spoke with her. In fact, they even discovered that he had called her back after she was missing and left an angry voicemail, but then noticed something they hadn't known about, and it blew the case wide open. Throughout that Friday night that Susan disappeared, she received dozens of phone calls from a number that didn't immediately stand out to detectives. The calls started while she was still at the bar with her friends and continued during her date with Brad. And initially, they could see that Susan had answered some of the calls, but as they grew frequent, she stopped answering and instead sent them straight to voicemail. These voicemails are what are going to lead the police directly to their killer. They did need the password for her voicemail, which was obtained from her daughter Mara. After the conversation, they pressed her to recall any other details about her mother's night that might seem to be important. And in that moment, a light bulb went off for Mara. Suddenly, everything came together, and the missing pieces of the puzzle began to align. The year before, Mara had tracked down her biological father, Marty Larson, on Facebook, and the two had reconnected, which means Marty had also re entered Susan's life.
Mhm.
He was 3 hours away in Billings, and Susan and Marty had begun talking frequently, even meeting up, and they had even discussed the possibility of rekindling their relationship and considered getting married again and moving to a new town together as a family. However, Susan put those plans on hold as she focused on finalizing her divorce from Ted, because she was still technically married to Ted, had just started
Yes.
seeing Brad, and now
Uh-huh.
Marty was back in the picture.
Uh-huh.
Nice little tangled web we weave there. At the beginning of April 2008, Marty somehow found out about Brad. He confronted Susan, and she assured him she had ended her brief relationship with Brad and was committed to making things work with Marty. But on that Friday night, as she was parking with Brad, it seemed that Susan had plans that didn't exactly include running off with Marty. Even though she had been reassuring him, she was still clearly caught up in the excitement of her new relationship with Brad. And whether it was a thrill of a fresh start or simply desire to have some fun after years of turmoil, Susan seemed to be keeping her options open. What she didn't know is that night had set off chain of events with consequences no one could have seen. Maria also remembered that at one point on Friday night, Susan had actually called her asking how to block a number that was ringing her phone incessantly. And this is when the voicemails came into play. That number that was calling did belong to Marty. Marty's voicemail started out fairly normal, asking her to call him back and saying he was worried he hadn't heard from her. Then they began to sound more desperate, not just in tone, but also in his language. And eventually he said if she didn't call back by 1 a.m., he would make the 3-hour drive to her apartment saying, quote, "I don't know what to do. You won't answer me." Investigators noticed that he didn't only sound desperate, but there was an edge of anger in his tone. The calls had been coming in very fast, multiple calls per hour. And initially, police traced them from a cell tower in Billings, but after 1 a.m., they had been pinging along the highway that led straight to Glendive. Going back a little bit, I mentioned way back at the start that Susan and Marty met in college and things had moved quickly. She got pregnant, they got married. But after she left Marty, she moved on fast. She married Ted as quick as she could.
Mm-hmm.
Just 24 hours into Ted and Susan's marriage, Marty actually showed up at her home with a shotgun.
Oh.
No one was harmed, but he was arrested and charged with several offenses, including shooting at his ex-wife's house while his own children were inside asleep. And Susan immediately took out a restraining order against him.
But that was like 10 years prior.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. In those 10 years since the arrest, Marty had stayed away and had no contact at all with Susan or the kids. He didn't pay child support and didn't make any effort to contact Mara and Shay. So the cops hadn't even considered him a suspect until Maria came forward with that information. So police wanted to talk to Marty as soon as possible about the 22 phone calls and what he was doing outside of her apartment at 5 a.m. because that's right, his phone showed that he was right outside her building when she went missing. Yeah.
Really?
Marty came into the station and began telling them a similar story to the one they had heard from Maria. And even though he and Susan had lost touch for 10 years, they had rekindled their romance last year and were looking forward to getting married. Incidentally, when police searched his apartment, they found what looked like a list of tasks for organizing a wedding, speak to a minister, book accommodations, etc. So his story on that at least made sense. He continued speaking, explaining that on Friday night, Susan had told him she was going out with friends for a few drinks. He admitted he'd been a little worried because she tended to overdo it with alcohol, which he told police was why he'd been calling so much, just to check that she was safe. And he even admitted to them that he had left Billings around 1 a.m. when he hadn't heard back from her, claiming he thought something must be wrong. So they pulled his phone records, and investigators found that he had arrived at the apartment building next door to Susan's around 4:30 a.m., parking at the side, exactly where they found those strange drag marks. They asked him what he did once he got there. He told them he simply stood outside of her building waiting for her to get home, which would account for the footprint they had found at the unused entrance. But this is where his story started to unravel. He claimed he hadn't seen Brad's truck pull in right across the apartment building or noticed Brad and Susan getting hot and heavy for 20 minutes inside the vehicle. You think if he's watching and he saw them pull up, his story's starting to kind of get a little wonky.
Yeah. And then she gets out the car with her bra strung over her shoulder.
Right. If he'd been there, I think he'd noticed that. And he probably would have confronted her.
Yeah.
Anyway, during his interview, officers were searching his van. They found a substantial amount of blood. From outside from the outside, the van looked freshly clean, but the underside told a different story, and investigators found a lot of blood underneath. Forensic tech collected samples and sent them off to the lab. When detectives confronted Marty about this information, he didn't deny it, said yes, there would be blood because he apparently hit a deer on the way back to Billings. That's why he claimed he washed the van in the first place. The text did report that the interior of the van had been cleaned with a bleach product, which matched an empty bleach bottle found in the earlier search of his apartment. But why would you have to bleach the inside of the van if you just hit a deer? Little
Yeah.
odd. Lab results came back confirming that the blood under the vehicle was indeed from a deer, but they're looking for DNA inside. But unfortunately, the bleach had done its job, which left any remaining evidence too degraded for a DNA match. The only clue that survived the vigorous cleaning inside was a few hairs caught in the van's plastic molding, and they did belong to Susan Casey. Problem was that's not strong enough evidence. Investigators knew the defense lawyer could easily explain that away, given that Marty and Susan had allegedly rekindled their relationship. So they went back to the voicemails, and investigators found one last message from Marty left long after Susan was already dead. It struck them that his tone had changed drastically. All the previous messages had either been desperate or angry, but not this one. In this one, he sounded happy with no hint of desperation or frustration. He said it was great to hear from her and glad that she was okay and that she was heading home. This was suspicious, but not enough to arrest him. But neither Susan's phone records showed calls between them. So how had he spoken to her? And until they could answer that, Marty kind of remained a free man. It is worth noting, though, that almost immediately after his interrogation, Marty left Montana and hooked it off to Arizona.
Ooh.
Susan's family were still left with a lot of questions. The two youngest girls were now living with Ted, while the eldest two had moved in with their uncle and aunt, Rusty and Valerie. All of them were left to deal with the devastating void of Susan being gone in their lives. Rusty was certain he knew who killed his sister and grew tired of waiting for justice to be served. He began talking to Valerie and friends about taking matters into his own hands, even making plans to take Marty's life, believing Marty had taken his sister's. This obsession consumed him, and tragically, because of this, his marriage with Valerie broke down. And then, unfortunately, in November of 2011, Rusty did take a life, but it wasn't his sister's killer. He killed himself. At just 32 years old, he left behind his parents, his ex-wife, his young son, and Susan's children. They did lay him to rest beside his sister, though. A year would pass, and the district found itself with a new chief prosecutor who believed the case still deserved close attention. He kept pushing Susan's case forward, and nearly 4 years after she vanished, just stepped from her front door, a suspect was finally arrested in February of 2012. Marty Larson, apprehended outside his apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, was charged with the murder of Susan Casey and extradited to Montana. He was denied bail, and now he waited trial. Unfortunately for the family, more tragedy would come. Mara, who was 18 years old and just a day away from graduating high school, fell asleep at the wheel, caused her car to veer into a ditch and roll, and she did pass. There were no skid marks at the scene.
I was just looking up pictures of the people and just saw that. I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is terrible.
They did bury Mara next to Susan and her uncle Rusty.
Next to Susan and Rusty.
When it came to Marty, the district attorney made it clear there would be no room for negotiation. There was no interest in offering a plea deal. The district attorney and Susan's family had waited too long to bring her killer to justice, and a lenient deal wasn't an option. He felt this was about honoring Susan's memory and finding real justice for her and her family. Marty continued to claim his innocence, but Susan's remaining family stood firmly by the decision, resolute to see him face the full weight of his actions. When Marty walked into the courthouse, jaws dropped. He'd lost nearly 80 pounds in the time he'd been held in jail awaiting trial, and he looked like a shadow of the man who once sat in the interrogation room. He wasn't confident anymore, and in his place, he was very gaunt, and there was a very hollow version of himself. And it really seemed almost fitting for one who had taken Susan's life. Prosecutors did present the jury with a detailed timeline of Marty's movements from Friday night to Saturday morning. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecution played the voicemails one after another. And they heard what started as concern soon turned into frustration, then obsession. Through those messages, the jury could hear a man teetering on the edge who was willing to do anything to reclaim what he thought was his. They also presented a history of abusive messages from Marty to Susan that were discovered by detectives that signaled the existence of a very sinister undercurrent, which ultimately led to Susan's death.
He shot at her house 10 years previously.
Yep. The prosecution then turned to the evidence found in Marty's apartment, including his detailed notes on planning a future with Susan. When he arrived in Glendive and saw her with someone else, his plans were shattered for that rekindling of their marriage. Prosecutors laid out findings from Marty's van, the areas of heavily saturated with bleach, and then there was the hair found caught in the plastic molding that painted a picture of what might have taken place. Then they pointed to the strange email Brad had received and the phone call Ted had gotten. Those came back into play as the prosecution revealed that both the email and the phone call were traced back to a computer owned by Marty. It became clear that Marty had tried to intimidate both men, hoping to drive them away from Susan. But when that didn't work, he decided he went to desperation. He made sure that Susan wouldn't be with anyone else again. And in their closing argument, the prosecution laid out the sequence of events one final time. Marty had arrived at Susan's apartment before Brad and Susan, finding her car, but not her. So he waited. He saw Brad pull up with Susan, and he watched them together. As Brad eventually drove off, Marty stepped out of the shadows and confronted Susan. Marty had been simmering with jealousy and anger for months, and whatever was said in those early morning hours, it was clear it didn't go the way he had hoped. Susan fought for her life. Her fingers showed clear signs of a struggle before Marty ultimately strangled her. He dragged her through the alley, tossed her into his van, and drove towards the Yellowstone River, where he callously dumped her body. And on the way back, he left a voicemail, which was calm, casual, and pretending everything was fine. The defense tried to create doubt, arguing that the prosecution's theory was little more than speculation. They suggested that perhaps Brad or Ted were responsible for Susan's death, asserting that Ted had the most to gain financially from her death since he was still the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. This claim was quickly dismantled by the evidence. It was easy to prove Ted had used the life insurance payout to cover Susan's funeral expenses, and any remaining money was distributed among their 4 children. So this is hardly the actions of someone who was going for financial gain.
Yep.
Marty's testimony was critical in the trial, but his story didn't hold up under scrutiny. He admitted he had been in Glendive at the time of Susan's death, but his account was full of contradictions and inconsistencies. According to Marty, he had driven 3 hours to get to her apartment, parked in a spot where he couldn't even see her return. And then after waiting for some time, he just gave up and drove back to Billings without even attempting to see her. This didn't make sense. While that effort to park in a spot where he couldn't observe her coming home, we talked about this earlier. Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he have waited to speak to her, especially after he had driven so far? His actions were not of someone who was concerned about a woman. They were the actions of someone who was desperate and who was angry.
Yeah, and then if that's the case, then why leave the voicemail? Unless you're trying to cover something up, why leave the voicemail? Because you clearly didn't talk to her.
His testimony, honestly, it weakened his defense. The jury wasn't buying it. They saw through the holes in the story and recognized it for what it was. The jury made a decision quickly. They only deliberated 3 hours, coming back with a guilty verdict. And on April 5th, 2015, Marty Larson was sentenced to 110 years in prison for the murder of Susan Casey. He is not eligible for parole until 2042. And to this day, he continues to claim his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him.
You said 2042?
2042.
And he was, like 20 years old in 1993? Yeah, he's not getting out.
Well, in a final little stab, the judge also ordered Marty to pay for the funeral costs for Susan and for jury expenses.
Wow.
It was a bittersweet moment for Susan's family. They had endured years of heartache and uncertainty. The scars of the loss, they're never going to fully heal, but at least they had some peace now, knowing that Susan's killer was caught and will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Um, this case did propel discussions on domestic violence fatality reviews.
Hmm.
The case has raised some very critical questions about the perceptions of battered women and the pressures they navigate. Um, the legacy of this event serves as a catalyst for awareness and change. They're shedding light on the very dark corner of such relationships, and there's many people who have took up the cause of this, and they're urging society to confront these issues head on, because we've talked about this before in episodes, that sometimes when there is obvious abuse going on, whether it's child abuse, whether it's domestic violence, all too often people turn an eye and think, this is not my business. I don't want to
This
get
is not
involved
my
in this.
business. I don't want to get involved in this.
And that's sad,
Hmm.
because when there is clear cut signs of abuse, we need to be saying something. We
Yeah.
need to be stepping in,
See
because,
something, say something, man.
well, absolutely. And because you kind of you have an obligation to say something,
Hmm.
because the person who is being abused, again, whether it's a child, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a significant other, whatever, too often those people don't know how to get out of that situation. They
Yeah.
don't see a way out, and they don't know a way out, and all they can do is suffer at the
Hmm.
hands of their abusers. um, so if you take anything from this case, do not take a blind eye to that. If you suspect there is an abuse situation going on, say something to somebody.
Hmm.
Do everything you can to get the person out of that situation. Does that mean that it's a situation where they're never going to see their once loved one again? Possibly not, because maybe that person can get help, and
Hmm.
maybe things can be fixed, and maybe things will be okay. But if you don't say something, you're risking something like this,
Yeah.
because you never know the person who is committing that violence,
Yeah.
what level they're going to go to. So, anyway, that's the story of the murder of Susan Casey.
Well, thank you, sir.
Sorry, that was a long one.
No, no, that was a good one. It was riveting.
Yeah, I really thought so. I did quite a bit of reading on this one. I read through the court documents, and it was pretty interesting trial. Um, but yeah, there was that was a very interesting one that came across. There were so many twists in it, because at certain points during the story, it's like, who did it? Was it the boyfriend? Was it the current husband?
No, it was the first husband
And
who'd walked out.
yeah, who'd walked out and hadn't been heard from, as far as the family knew, for a very long time. But obviously Susan and he had started talking again. So anyway,
Well, and
that
what's really sad is it sounds like Susan was basically polyamorous, which honestly is fine. Just, but there was no way to explain that 10 years ago. I mean, that's a recent thing.
yeah.
And if that's what you are, that's what you are. Just, roll with it.
This is so Chuck, if you're still awake, you're hearing me talk about you again. This is advice I gave Chuck not very long ago, about a situation he was dealing with somebody, and what I told him very specifically is exactly what you're saying. You got to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that is their happiness in life, which makes them happy, as long as that doesn't infringe on the right or to live for somebody else,
Let them do it.
let them
It's
do
not,
it.
it's not your, yeah. Yeah.
Meet
If
them
you
where they
want to
are.
love them, you got to meet them where they are.
Yes.
And
Yes,
if you can't meet them
absolutely.
where they are, you need to find somebody else.
Right. So yeah. Anyway, that will take
Man,
us.
we are so much healthier now than we were like 4 years ago when we started this. Oh, and by the way, kids, we are so close to our 4 year anniversary.
Well, some of it might be healthier. I'm not healthy. I'm crazy as a
You,
fuck.
mentally.
I'm mentally crazy as a fuck.
The fuck you are. You're so much healthier.
Eh.
Love you, man.
I'm definitely older, that's for sure.
Oh, God, yeah. I'm falling apart, man.
God, I am too. It sucks getting old, kids.
Yeah.
Anyway, that'll take us to the end of another reporting week. As always,
Wake up, Chuck.
You may be asleep by now. As always, you can find more about us on nerdyandmurder.com. That's our website, our hub for everything that we talk about here. You can find the links to what we talk about, pictures of what we talk about. Plus, you'll find the link to our YouTube page, which so often updates.
Yeah, kids, hit that YouTube page because there's 2 full films in that, plus a whole bunch of really great scenes. Just check them out.
Awesome, appreciate that. You'll also find a link to our merchandise page, which if you wish to show off your Nerdery Murdery fandom, please do get out there, purchase something from that. That helps us, help get our name out there. It's just a free advertisement, so consider that. You can also find the link to our Patreon account where our patrons help with the costs that are associated with the show, along with the merchandise. There are costs that are associated with keeping us on the air, costs for our website, costs for our uploads, everything like that. So please do consider purchasing something or donating to the show. We do appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It's free. It really helps us and helps others find our content that may be looking for the topics we discuss. So with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdering.
Keep the music.
A new clue in the dark or in the light. Murdery and murdery, cheats and detectives pave the way. Laughs and chills and all the thrills in every episode we stay. Solving equations, forensic delight. From board games to murders, they'll keep you up all night. Puzzle pieces and clues, forming stories so bright. Every twist a new clue in the dark or in the light. Murdery and murdery, cheats and detectives pave the way. Laughs and chills and all the thrills in